We know at the beginning that we're ready. Otherwise, we weren't ready. It couldn't be the beginning. It would have to be already something wrong. No, it's actually nice being here to come and talk after Ellie has shown her stuff, because it puts me into a very good mood. She's irrepressibly comic, which is something I've always loved about her. In fact, one of the things I used to say, I don't dare say it without Ellie around, is that the reason I was so happy to marry her is she always makes me laugh. Don't think that's a trivial thing. It's not trivial to be able to laugh. Considering the world we happen to be in at the moment, that doesn't have the laughter seems to be one of the few ways of surviving. It's not that I want to go into the long list of things that are going on in the world that I don't like, but the situations all over the world, it always seems to be in a point of crisis. And if you constantly pay attention to the crisis, you get totally depressed. It doesn't help anybody that you do that either. So even if the ship is sinking, you may as well be amused while the ship sinks. At least you might like the tunes they play while the Titanic goes under the water. I originally intended, when I came here to do this, last year I was going to come here, and the Iceland volcano interfered with my life and prevented me from coming. And it's interesting to be prevented by a volcano. It seems like overkill, doesn't it? I mean, just one poet coming to participate in a conference and the volcano says you can't come. But we have things like that all the time, apparently. I should imagine that the volcanoes, if you didn't have a volcano, I guess it would be turned out you might have a tsunami, or you might have an earthquake, or you might just have a rainstorm, or you might have an absence of rain. All of these wonderful contingencies that the world is made up of. And then we come and theorize ways around it in which we make ourselves feel as if we understood what had happened. In some sense or another, the earthquake and the tsunami that have placed Japan in great peril seem so startling. They seem startling in a certain sense that one would have expected the Japanese, who had suffered the direct effects of an atomic bomb, you'd have imagined they had a phobia. You'd imagine they had a phobia to the nuclear energy. And apparently they didn't have a phobia to nuclear energy. They should have had. And we learned that they let terrible things happen in their inspections and their safeguards against bad situations. But even in the best of all possible worlds, probably they wouldn't have anticipated an earthquake and a tsunami hitting just where their major nuclear reactor complex is. You wouldn't expect it, but maybe you have to expect bad things as being, even if they're improbable. The improbable happens. There's a difference between the improbable and the impossible. The improbable is never impossible. The impossible is hard to tell. How do you know something's impossible? It never happened. Well, it never happened, but then it happens. Then it wasn't impossible. It reminds me a little bit of the limitations of Wittgenstein's early work, the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, in which he says in his opening sentence, a very shocking opening sentence, Die Welt ist alles, was der Fall ist, that the world is everything that is the case. And that seemed to leave out a lot. If you would think about the tsunami the tsunami and the horrible effects of the tsunami, you say to yourself, well, it wasn't the fact that this could happen. For a long time, it wasn't the fact. It was like a black swan or a white raven. Actually, I prefer thinking of it as a white raven. If the tsunami couldn't, with any probability, have happened, unfortunately, it happened. And so it wasn't the fact before that a tsunami could destroy your nuclear plant. It might not have been a fact at the beginning. It might have been a fact that this wasn't the case. So it's a fact that a tsunami will not destroy your power plant because we have all these safeguards. And then it destroys the power plant, and it becomes a fact that it did do it. So what does Wittgenstein in the age of his early work suppose happens? How can it be that the world is everything that is the case if the world turns out to have new things that are the case, and there are things that have become no longer the case? The problem is things are constantly changing from being the case to not being the case, but to maybe being the case. And while I thought about this to some extent, I had wanted, before I had been interrupted by this goddamn volcano with an unpronounceable name, at least unpronounceable to non-Icelanders. But I had originally intended to come up here and do a talk relating to the idea of experience, which has been one of my major interests, is why I'm so committed to the notion of experience, and what there is in the notion of experience distinguishes it, let's say, from a theoretical report. The first thing about the term experience that is interesting to me is that you can't define experience collectively. In other words, experience is it refers to a collection of scenes. You can't, experience may be something like a petroleum. You say petroleum, you don't mean a petroleum, do you? Is a petroleum, is there such a thing as a petroleum? No. Is there such a thing as grain? Yes. Is there such a thing as experience? What do you mean when you say experience? What does the damn word mean? Does it mean an experience? John Dewey had a book that he wrote, a very strange book he wrote, very inadequate in certain ways, but it has very brilliant aspects to it. And it's a book called Art as Experience. But is art as experience mean the same thing as art as an experience? Or does it mean that art is an experience? The word experience floats in this strange place. He really thinks he means art consists essentially of having an experience, generating an experience in some way. And what was an experience to John Dewey was rather curious. He gives an account of a man who, I think it was a man, and maybe it was a woman, who, in those days they never wrote with women as the examples of the things. So let me say, it was a woman has come to Paris, and she has been told about this wonderful restaurant on the right bank, which has the most astonishingly tasteful boeuf de bourguignon that had ever been tasted by anybody alive. Now that seems for a hearty, commonplace dish like that, it seems it should be no problem. Well, she orders the dish, and before she orders the dish, she also orders she orders an appetizer of frog's legs. Again, the specialty of the house, the little amphibian legs. But the little amphibian legs come to her, and she's waiting for all this. In the meantime, she's ordered an extremely beautiful white wine, and from one of the great maisons around. And she has this white wine served to her as well, and she starts to eat the frog's leg, and it tastes to her like dried out chicken leg. And she's really feeling very bad about this. But she then waits for her boeuf bourguignon, and the boeuf bourguignon comes in, it's tough and stringy. And she then supported it, she thought she would carry it off maybe with a glass of good Bordeaux. And she had ordered the Bordeaux, and it didn't taste as great as it should have. Now she's in the midst of a total disaster, and they ask her if she wants a dessert. It seems like a crowning insult after having offended her with the entree and the main dish, and now they're offering her consolation. They're saying, how about a dessert? But she thinks she'll try, and she orders an apple and a slab of brie. And the apple comes in, and it is the most beautiful apple you've ever seen. It has this sort of aroma, the odor of the apple is like a romantic effusion. And the wine that she ordered for that turns out to be much better. But the cheese is the masterpiece. This is a Normandy brie that you have never seen anything like. And she remembers the taste of this. Years later, she's very ill and she's dying. And her son, who is surviving her, says to her, "Mother, you must have had experiences that made your life worth living." She said, "No, but I had one." And he said, "What was that? What was that, Mother?" She said, "Of the apple and the brie. I remember the apple, and I remember the brie, and I remember the debris of the rest of the meal through which I climbed in order to arrive at this final dessert, the memory of which allows me to die in peace." And then she dies. Now, this is an account of an experience. It's mobilized. It's mobilized around it. Desire. In fact, it has what I call narrative substance. Now,